Hey guys, what's going on? This is Kyle at Projection Hub, and today I'm going to be talking about how to write a business plan for an acquisition. Now, as I mentioned, my name is Kyle, and my time before Projection Hub, I was an SBA loan officer for almost 7 years. And so during my time doing that, that looked like helping founders, startups, people acquiring businesses, existing businesses go through the SBA loan application process. And so, helping them prepare their application, review their business plan, review their projections, all of that good stuff. And during my time there, I got a chance to work with several acquirers or buyers of businesses to help them on the SBA financing portion of their deal. So the perspective I'm going to be giving as I go through and demonstrate how to write a business plan for an acquisition, I'm going to be using a fictitious example, which is a template that you can download for free down in the description below, no strings attached at all. It's kind of a fully fleshed out fake acquisition concept. So I'm going to be going through that whole thing through the outline, show you the structure of it. And the main takeaways, there's going to be these 5 key points, or I guess there's a 6th bonus point. The 5 key points that I think take an acquisition business plan from good to really good. So everything you see in the business plan is going to be kind of like a minimum expectation or something I would recommend doing. But then I'll really spend some extra time on those 5 or 6 key areas that I think really can level up the business plan based upon what I had seen in my experience. So we've probably gathered, this is probably going to be more of a fit for someone if you're looking for financing, especially SBA financing, in order to pull off this acquisition. And so, that could apply to different types of deal sizes, large and small, but probably going to be on the smaller side of the medium-sized side. So, if you're going to be courting millions and millions of dollars for equity investment or that kinds of thing, then, you might want a slightly different approach, but I still think the bones will be helpful. So, and a little bit about Projection Hub. We've been helping startups and founders, not me personally, but the business. We've been helping them for over 10 years now. We've helped more than 50,000 different small businesses and founders and buyers create financial projections for their loan applications, for their pitch decks, for internal planning. And so, when we get to the financial projections section, I'll spend a little bit more time there just because that's our specialty, that's our sweet spot. And hopefully I'll have some good takeaways for you there. So if at any point you like this video, give it a thumbs up. That's really helpful for us as a fellow small business. Consider subscribing to the channel. We've got a lot of different types of content that I think would be helpful, from SBA loans to creating projections to writing business plans to, expanding a business, all of that good stuff. And so, yeah. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. We are pretty responsive down there. You can also contact us directly at support@projectionhub.com. If you've got questions about your acquisition business plan or, your SBA application journey or anything like that, we'd be happy to help. And I'll plug a few more ways we can help throughout this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we go. We've got in front of us here our fictitious acquisition business plan example. Again, you can grab this exact document, this exact example down in the description below. It's got, like I said, a fully fleshed out example idea, or not example idea, but kind of fictitious example. And we're going to go through this thing top to bottom so you can see the outline, you can see what each section kind of contains. And then, it's obviously a whole business plan, so we don't want this video to be 3 hours long. So I'm not going to write it in front of you. But when we get to those 5 or 6 different key sections, I'll slow down a little bit, give a little bit more demonstration, talk a little bit more about those as we're kind of going through it. So first thing that I'll point out is an acquisition can be of any type of business, any type of industry. So in order to make one effective business plan video about how to write a business plan for it, I had to just kind of choose an industry or a type. And that may be very different than yours. And so hopefully you'll still give this video a shot, because the 5 or 6 key points that I'm going to talk about apply to every industry. And those are kind of the crucial concepts. So the what you write in between, the structure, I think you can still take this business plan and apply it to your concept. I think the outline is still going to be just as important. And then the key points are still going to apply. So maybe we'll end up making industry specific version videos of this, but for right now, we're going to use this as a general example, and I still hope you give it a chance. So let's kind of start going through things here. First off, this isn't a key point, but I would have a nice cover photo. I think sometimes some people spend a little bit too much or put a little bit too much stock into the design of the business plan, but I do think it helps for it to look nice, right? It's a nice first impression. And so, you can do that, have something a little bit nice there. So you can see real quickly here in our table of contents, I'd like to point out is, because it's an acquisition, there's just more to it, right? It's kind of a combination of both a startup and an existing business, because you want to talk about what has made this business work, why it's worth buying. So there's a lot of historical details to go into that. But then you're going to have your own, the business changes when it goes through that acquisition. So you're going to bring your own ideas, your new style. You wouldn't be acquiring a business if you didn't have plans to probably grow it into something. And so that's where that startup kind of spin comes into it. So if you watch any of our other industry-specific startup business plan videos, and when I talk about and do this kind of thing, I usually advocate for a shorter business plan. When it comes to an acquisition, I think it's okay for it to be a little bit longer because there's just more information to be included that is important. And so just off the bat, I'll point out here is still your financial projections are by far the biggest section of your business plan, and they're probably the most important. So we're going to talk a little bit more when we get down there, but you can kind of see the roadmap we're going to be talking about. All right, so we're going to start going through this, and you'll see very obviously when we get to the key points, there are these nice big key points, right? So when you're going through this, if you get your own copy of that, you don't need to necessarily be taking notes. It's pretty obvious when they come up. So first off, we've got our executive summary. And as I stated, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you or explain to you why each subheading is key and important. I think you should just take my word for it that the way this is structured is you should have your own, adequate version of this in the details. But those key points I'm going to mention are something that just aren't typically maybe done super well in a business plan. So I would make extra effort to go above and beyond in those cases. So we've got our executive summary. Think about the executive summary as like the cover letter to an application, like a job application for like your resume. You put a cover letter on top of it. So it's just really your first impression of what you're going to be asking for financing. That's going to be the perspective I'm looking at this from. And so we just want to hit the high points. I think this does a pretty nice job. That's one page is a good thing to shoot for an executive summary. Describe what the business is going to be. What do you hope to do with the acquisition or following the acquisition? A nice summary of the financial details that just kind of helps frame the deal. Let's say for a lender, for a banker, you're framing the deal, right? A lot of people like to save, we don't want to talk about the finances till we get further into the business plan because we don't want to scare anybody away or, something like that. I think the opposite is true. I think it's helpful for the lender to kind of have the right context, the right expectations as they're reading through this, right? If they read through your whole business plan and they have in their mind like, oh, this is going to be a very small deal, then you get to the value and it's $2 million, it might be like, whoa, that's not what I was expecting. So if you take the initiative and just tell them some of the key financial numbers, it's their job to still read it, right? So that at least reframes, it puts a proper frame in their perspective so they kind of know what they're talking about. When they get there, there won't be any surprises when they get to the financial section. So you don't got to give them all the details, just a quick summary. How much is the acquisition? How are they going to be funding that? And so that's a nice little way to do that. And then you got some key success factors here, which ultimately key success factors are going to be very similar from acquisition to acquisition. So if you really wanted to make this section worth it, I would say, don't make it too general, right? Established brand, passionate management. Like you could make the argument that this example is probably rather generic. So if there's really a key thing that's like, we have to do this thing well in order for this transition to work, like that's what you should include in there. So yeah. Next up, we've got our business description, which is really just one layer deeper than the executive summary, kind of an extension of that executive summary where we're going to go in a little bit more of the details of what's actually happening behind the scenes. So again, we got our identity, the history of the business, just framing that up. We're talking more about the actual space. So you're gathering, I'm not reading this example out to you, but this acquisition is for a retail store in Asheville, North Carolina that sells, artisan goods, home decor, handmade gifts, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. That to me made a good example acquisition use case because it's a tangible place. There's good benchmarking available for it. So obviously your industry doesn't have to fit that model. There's going to be things I talk about in here that would apply for a storefront or retail and might not for others. And so that's why I mentioned there's a bonus point because that one's going to apply more to storefronts, brick and mortar type things. But the other 5 key points are still going to apply, I promise you. So we go into a little bit more detail about who it started, when it was founded, the space itself, some of the describing the current operations, because again, we're blending the existing and the startup business. It's nice because you don't have to describe the business as an idea. It actually exists. And so you just need to describe how it already exists. And then the time will come where you get to talk about how you plan to enhance it and improve it and continue it on. And so I'm not going to say it's easier than a startup business plan, but you're more describing things that already exist rather than trying to paint the picture that's in your mind, right? And your hypothetical. So I think you just need to go through the structure and just write what exists for that business that you're exploring. We outline the products and services. One thing that's missing in this example is I would probably apply, it wouldn't hurt to apply prices in here. This is business description, so we are just describing the offering. We'll see when we get down there, but when we get down more into the later sections, there might be pricing involved with that. But ultimately there's gonna be financial statements involved in that kind of stuff too. So that's just a thing you could put in here if you would like to. But you can see our products and services. We describe the facility a little bit more, what's included in that space. And then we've got our first key point, but this is the one I was mentioning, a bonus key point. And that's a location analysis. So if the physical location actually matters, then this is a great opportunity to show visuals. I think, business plans, you don't need to throw worthless images into a business plan because you think it makes it look better. Only include graphics or visuals that actually have a purpose. If you're visualizing important data, if you have a physical location and you want to show screenshots of it, this helps provide some perspective. These are just Google Maps screenshots zoomed in so you can see what things are surrounding this business. Zoom out a little bit so you have a concept of where is it located at in the city. Again, you as the reader or the viewer of this video, even me as the creator, this map may not mean a whole lot to me because I'm not familiar with the area, but to someone who might be a lender in the local area, not all lenders have to be local, this can be a helpful kind of theater of the mind exercise. And again, something like a storefront wants to attract people. So this gives you the chance to see what's located around this. You can see there's a theater here, there's restaurants here, lots of things, so it's just a good helpful visual. So that's a bonus key point. Some people might just leave it at this, right? They describe the facility, type of street that it's on. It's not a difficult thing to take that an extra step and describe visually with different images and maps and that kind of stuff. Now, if you're an industry that doesn't have a storefront, so maybe you're considering purchasing an e-commerce business or a SaaS business or different things like that, your funding structure will probably be entirely different, but you could still do this with digital material, right? Or a website or their social platforms or different things like that too. So kind of a bonus key point primarily for storefronts, brick and mortar, but can be applied to other industries as well. All right, then we move on to our market analysis. So here we're going to kind of just describe the state of the market that the business is going to be operating into the lender. So what I want you to avoid doing, and this is probably less tempting on the acquisition side versus the startup side, but avoid doing the Shark Tank approach of the artisan gifts industry is $600 billion a year and we just need to capture 0.01% of 1%. Don't do that thing. We're just talking about your addressable market. So the area where you could actually get a customer or where you're competing for customers, that's what we want to talk about in the market. We want to make sure, if the person that's reading this is familiar with the area, even if they're familiar with the area, they may not be familiar with the home goods, home decor, artisan gifts landscape. So we want to try and paint that picture for them. So a little bit of industry overview. So that means the local industry is what you should shoot for there. This is one thing that I like to do that in my startup videos, this would be a key point. I'm not going to make it a key point for the acquisition one, but I still help you demonstrate because I think that this is a nice visual that you can do. And again, this is going to work better for something that has a physical footprint, most likely, or where you can actually predict where your customer base is going to be physically. Now, if it's the entire US, you could still probably do this to a degree, but I think it matters a little bit more. It's a little bit more impactful for something physical. So what this is a screen grab from the Google keyword planning tool. So if you have a free Google AdWords account, you can use that. Again, it's totally free. And actually, let me just show it to you real quickly here. So as I mentioned, you can create a Google AdWords account for free. And then what you can do is come in here and basically simulate Google, like a Google search. So what I did is I set the target location to Asheville, North Carolina. I put in some things that I would think my customer would be searching for. And it's going to do some nice things for us here. It's going to give us some recommended related keywords. So this is kind of a tricky keyword one because my fictitious example sells lots of different things. Whereas if it was just like a bar, right, or a restaurant or a steakhouse, there's not a lot of variations of that search. But some nice things we can do here. So it's going to give me some related keyword ideas. It's going to give me an estimate of how, on average, how many times is it actually being searched, in Asheville, North Carolina for these things. But what I care most about, because obviously more than 400 people a month or 320 people a month are going to shop at these places. But what I care more about is this trend, right? So less about the 3-month change because that could be seasonal, right? Like if summer's tourism's high in Asheville, then that might be great depending upon the time of year you look at this, or it might be not be great. But I care more about this year-over-year change. And what this does as an indication to me is it just gives you an idea of, is there at least growing demand, growing interest in people searching for the things that might be relevant to what I can provide? So this is a free way to very quickly get an idea of demand. And so that to me is could be a nice visual reinforcement in your acquisition of kind of the market, because there's an opportunity there, right? I can say, you do this search and look at some of these things, 86% in boutique, 182% in the gift shop increase, 86%. It lumps some of these categorically, souvenirs up 1600%. So some of these are pretty high. That's promising stuff, right? There's not a retraction in the custom gifts boutique industry in my target area. So that should give me some confidence that if we can maintain this thing, there's an opportunity to grow business. So that's a fun little free tool that you can use for any industry, any location, that you can just monitor search data. And if it's negative, okay, then we gotta think about the fact that okay, if less people are searching for the thing that I'm selling, how are we gonna make this thing work? What are we gonna do differently to ensure the audience, believes that? All right, going back over here to our business plan. So, we are in the market analysis. So that's kind of just giving a lay of the land, right? You can see there's a growing interest, demand in the things we have to offer. Analyze your target market. So Asheville, North Carolina is actually a tourist heavy place. A lot of people go there for trips. So we can see who are we targeting? Again, pretty self-explanatory on how to do that. So what I just showed you was a little exercise to estimate the demand change or growth. What that pairs really nicely with is whatever competitive analysis you can do, because that's the supply side. So if we can see there's a growing demand, because a thing to keep in mind here is obviously more than 300 people a month are going to frequent these types of stores. But what this could represent is 300 new customers up for grabs that have no idea where to go every single month, right? And so we want to grab those, and then as many of those as we want, and we want to see that monthly there's more and more people searching for that thing. And so the supply side is going to be some sort of an analysis of our competition. Now, a few ways to do this. You could do a formal market research study or competitor research study or something like that if you want to pay for it. That is a thing you can hire people to do. I kind of like to do this type of thing, right? So if I, this is just for screenshots of seeing what is in the area from, we could attract different customers from. But another thing that you could do similar to that is just do a Google search and try to search something at, we just did these keyword ideas for the search volume that we think people will be searching for. And if what we would want the person searching for to find us, we want to make sure we would show up for that, so we can see who else would show up for that, right? So if we're in Asheville, North Carolina here, and we can start to zoom in and we can see, obviously I would put the location where I think our fictitious example maybe exists down here somewhere else. So you can see there's lots of shops. And so when you have a tourist dense area, you don't need to list every single retail shop that exists. You just need to pick and choose maybe the 3 to 5 that are most closely your competitor, that resemble selling the same thing as you do. If there's lots of people that sell the same thing as you do, okay, then you got to maybe refine that down to like price point, experience, that kind of stuff. But pick the 3 to 5 closest competitors to you that might be physically close as well as what they offer close. And we can zoom in here and we can see that we have these shops. You can take a screenshot of that so people can see how competitive it is. But I would make sure I know every single direct competitor, like the closest competitors I can, within a radius that you think is important, right? If that's 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles, like how far are people willing to travel in your neck of the woods in order to choose your business over a different business? And I would include those 3 to 5 closest competitors in your business plan, and then talk about what are they good at? So what's a strength, as well as what's a weakness? So, their strength could be maybe they've been around a long time. Maybe they're a 80-year-old business and they just have a super mainstay there. But maybe their weakness is their Google reviews are not great, right? So that's a weakness for that. So include what they do well, what they don't do well. This type of example, your local competitions can be really important. I don't think it's all that meaningful to include Etsy and Amazon in this because they're always going to exist and be an option for people, and people know that that's an option. So I'm not under the impression we need to beat out Etsy or we need to beat out Amazon. Clearly, people have an interest in what we have to provide. And so I'm more interested in beating the person down the street than I am, an inevitable giant like that. SWOT analysis, we're not going to explain SWOT analysis, but it's probably relatively straightforward to you at this point on outlining those things. And then we finally made it to officially first key point number 1. And I promise they'll kind of happen here in rapid succession as we're moving forward. But the thing we want to make sure we really communicate in our business plan is why is this business successful and what makes it work? What has made it work up to this point? Because if you're talking to your lender might really believe in you. They might like your ideas for changes, and we'll get to that here in a second. But what can be really impactful is if you don't have to convince your lender the only way that this acquisition works is if you do all the things that you say you're going to grow and expand and do all of that. If you can give them some comfort knowing that, hey, even if, I changed nothing in this business, it would still be fine. It would sustain loan payments. Before we ever change anything, it would still work. The better we can do painting that picture, that's huge brownie points. So while it's really exciting to talk about how you're going to make the business your own, the changes you're going to make, the growth you want to see happen, before we get to that, take a step back and just make sure you do a thoughtful job of painting what has happened in a really nice light. And that may not, I'm not saying to lie if that's not the case. If it's a fixer-upper and that's really what it's going to take, then you need to explain, the good bones that exist and what you're going to do to make it a success. But like in our fictitious example here, it's been a long established business and the owners just want to retire. And so there's no reason that this needs to be a fixer-upper. It's got opportunity, but I really want to talk about the fact of this business has worked. And so you can see here in our acquisition strategy and rationale section, we start to do that, right? So we these 3 paragraphs talk about, how it's thrived and there's a regular audience, and even a quick little financial tidbit of it's been profitable for a long time, clearing, cash every month. The current owners are selling for personal reasons because they want to retire. So we're just taking the step to make sure the reader or the lender understands that, this business, if we touched nothing, if we just maintained the status quo, that it would be fine. And so that's the key point number 1, is making sure you take that step. Resist the temptation to talk about how this is an overhaul and we're going to transform everything. Again, if that's the requirement for the business, there's probably a different approach to that. But lenders like, conservativeness. They like realistic expectations. So, you can feed into that by saying this is a shoe-in, right? This is a no-brainer. All right, going on with our acquisition kind of strategy and rationale section, let's talk about now what are our objectives for the acquisition. And again, continuing on what I was just saying, we talk about in here how we want to build on something that's already been done. We don't want to disrupt what has already been done. And you can read if you download the example, you can read more of that and get some of your own impressions of that. But it's not going to be anything groundbreaking in this section. Again, it is a fictitious example. But you can see some obvious things like expand the product offering, enhance the online presence, and increase community engagement, optimize some operations. So nothing crazy. Those are all fine-tuning things, not like, we want to completely remodel the store or, change what we're selling entirely or, different things like that, which are more dramatic changes. We talk about the purchase price, how we think the value is justified. So you can do that as well. We get into our funding strategy. So like, how are we actually going to pay for this? Including owner equity, a loan, and a seller's note. So we'll talk more about seller's notes and that type of thing, what they can represent, how important those can be. We talk about working capital requirements, management, risk analysis. So I'm not going through these things again because they're not important. It's just, you're going to want to have your own version of it. So there's not a lot of narrative that needs to go around them. You just need to make your own version of that because they are important things. So trying to move forward to get us to our key points. Okay. Next up, we're getting to our transition plan. This is going to bring us to key point number 2. And that is, obviously in an acquisition, we know a transition is going to have to take place from the sellers to the buyers. There's going to be that happening. Depending upon how, the relationship between the buyer and the seller, how you found the business, how motivated is the seller. Like, there's so many variables that could impact this. And so I think this is why a lot of times, business sales or acquisitions, not that they're rare, but it just doesn't happen as frequently as people are starting businesses because, there's got to be a right match. There's got to be the right recipe that comes together. There's a lot of failed deals out there. There's a lot of deals that don't make it to an LOI, or there are some that make it to an LOI and still fall through. So there's a reason for that because there's a lot of moving parts in personalities and motivations and all of that stuff that go into it. So key point number 2 might sound a little obvious, but that is to make sure you form a deal and a transition plan that works, that's actually supportive of your goals and what you hope to accomplish in the business. So some examples of that could be, because I think this is kind of two-parter. One is the structure of the deal. So I pointed out we have a seller's note, right? So I'm not going to use this video to go into the deep details of a seller's note, mainly because that's not my expertise. We have people on our team that can walk you through that if you're more interested in that side of things. But that's not a super traditional, approach, right? Some people might be like, well, I'm just getting a loan for the whole acquisition price plus the money I'm putting in. Or they're just going to court an investor or pay for it all themselves or something like that. Those would be common ways to go about doing it. But, using something strategic like a seller's note as part of the portion. So if the seller is obviously wanting to retire and maybe they don't, they're obviously going to make some money off of this acquisition, but they may not need it to survive, immediately. So they might be willing to accommodate you, right? They might, take a little less up front and then get paid over a few years for some portion of it. You could even offer to pay with interest. That could be helpful. We say supportive to the business because that might lessen the financial burden from the acquisition. So we already talked about how the business has performed well on its own and we don't want to disrupt that. If we don't change anything, it should be fine. But if, we have a really aggressive repayment plan or something like that, that could put unnecessary strain on the business that it's not currently set up to be successful under. So you just got to make sure whatever that deal structure is going to be on the financial side is supportive and realistic for the business to be able to handle that. And, using something like a seller's note as a portion of it is a creative way to help lessen that burden if necessary, and if the sellers are willing to entertain that type of thing, right? So there's a number of different ways to do that. If you have any confusion or concerns about, forming or structuring a deal that's going to be beneficial to you, feel free to reach out to us at support@projectionhub.com. Apply to the comments below. Our founder and owner, Adam, would be happy to give some insight and some ideas on, how he would approach those things. He's obviously owned a business. He's exploring purchasing businesses right now, and he's got over a decade of experience as an executive director for an SBA lender. And so has seen this a lot of times on the financing side. So could use his expertise. So, but part two to this, so one part is making sure the deal structure is favorable and doesn't put too much financial pressure on, you when you're buying the business. Part two of that is seeing if you can get the seller to agree to some sort of seamless and supportive transition plan. So, one of the most difficult things about an acquisition is the knowledge transfer. Depending upon how integrated and involved the sellers have been, they just have maybe done it for so long and they have all of this knowledge that is really hard to train, or they may not even know all the things that they know, and to transfer that knowledge can be really hard. So if it's a really clean cut, hand over the keys and then the business owner, the seller's out and you never hear from them again, that can be a real risk to the business because they just aren't there as a resource for you. And so if you can, while you're working on your structure, get them to agree to some sort of transition plan, if they are really a key component to what makes this business work, you need to make sure that you lock that in, right? There are creative ways you can do that. You could, in addition to what you're buying or paying them for the business, you could get them to agree to come on as like a consultant for 6 to 12 months and pay them a salary. There are different ways you could go about doing that, but that's just a way to ensure the success of the transition, is to make sure that the sellers are accessible and present. And I think when we go through this section, we have our own fictional example of trying to do this. So we've got a deal structure here where we've outlined, we're going to have a seller's note repaid over the next 3 years with a little bit lower interest, so that, reduces some of the payment versus putting more of that on the business loan at a higher interest rate. Or maybe even the lender wasn't comfortable doing more than they are, right? That might be another reason why the seller's note exists in this case. So you can see more about the deal structure. And then we've got a timeline here, right? So we can see when observation is happening, when we want to make operational changes, wait till month 4 to 6 to introduce new product lines, refine operations. So we can see we're not going to do too much too fast. You can see some roles and responsibilities, including the current owner will be hired as a consultant for the first 6 months of the transition to be compensated for their time and effort helping the transition go smoothly. I won't go too much into this, but another thing that I have seen and heard often in acquisitions is incentivizing the seller to stay involved and to make sure that the transition is successful. So that could be another thing to consider in the arrangement or the deal that you make with them, is they could have some sort of revenue target or profitability incentive that, if the business maintains or stays within X percentage of revenue or profitability of the prior year or something like that, that they would get some percentage of that, versus the seller, who is just ready to get out of the business and says like, good luck, I never want to, see you again. So especially right now in 2024, moving forward, there's what people are referring to as the silver tsunami, meaning that there's going to be a lot of baby boomer businesses that need to transition and people ready to sell. So there's a lot of businesses, a huge transfer of businesses that's about to happen, and not as many people going to buy those, which means that some people are going to have a harder time selling their business, and they're probably going to be more willing to creative, solutions, including like an incentive type agreement, or, basically ways to make sure that the seller doesn't alienate you and abandon you. And, if they're a really key part to making sure the transition works, you want to ensure that that happens. So that's probably enough talking about that. You can see the rest of the structure here, owner involvement. This would be the new owner is what we're talking about here. Training and knowledge transfer, communication strategy. So again, all of that, you should have your own version of that. But key point number 2 is really to emphasize a creative deal structure that works for you, and locking in the sellers as necessary if they're very key to making sure that, that knowledge transfer and that transition goes smoothly. Okay, moving on to key point number 3. So at the beginning, we talked about making sure we demonstrate to the lender that, if we change nothing, this will work. This is why the business would work, even if we changed nothing. So now that we've done that and we're a little bit deeper into the business plan now, well, we still have to talk about, like, we're not going to acquire business probably without plans to improve it or to grow it if there's not an opportunity there. So now we want to demonstrate, well, how are we going to improve the business and grow the business? However, how are we going to do it without screwing it up? So you don't want to say, we're going to be hands off, let things just be for a couple of months, and then come in and overhaul everything. Like, that's still a no-no. You don't want to do that. And so we want to be careful in how we approach talking about the improvements we're going to make. We want to do that in a way that is subtle, that is not disruptive to current. We don't want to alienate customers. We don't want to alienate staff members. We have to be careful in how we maintain that. So I don't have some grand examples for you here. It should probably make sense in your use case, but just the key point is to make sure you're thoughtful in how you communicate it and demonstrate that you're going to talk about how you're going to improve and grow the business. I know you're going to do that in your business plan, but just make sure you give a nod to, well, how are we going to make sure we don't screw up what already exists? So out of honor and respect to what the business has done and is already doing, how do we augment that to grow without totally, burning this thing to the ground on accident? So going through this section a little bit, and this key point number 3 kind of spans before and after key point number 4. I'll show you here in a second what I mean by that. But in this section, we'll get into the operations plan. So after the acquisition happens, how will we continue to operate the business, the daily operations? We get into staff, leadership retention, like how are we going to make sure we retain staff members, that kind of stuff. And then, as I mentioned, here's key point number 4 again. And this is a biggie. This is a really important one, and especially in startups. So this is another one of those nods to the startup business plan that's super important. And that's, we need to make sure that our business plan does an effective job at demonstrating that the new owners, or so if you're buying a business, we need to demonstrate that basically we know what we're doing and we know what we're getting ourselves into. And we definitely want our lenders to never have a concern that we're in over our head and that we're not going to be able to maintain, a successful business, an operational business. And so you need to outline what your relevant experience is. So you can see here, as a new owner of Charming Treasures, I bring a wealth of experience in retail management, deep passion for crafts and home decor with over 15 years in the retail industry, right? So we're going to talk about what we bring to the table to make sure that they know, like, hey, even though this isn't my business already, I'm equipped and know what I'm getting myself into. And if you personally don't have maybe all of the experience that you think it would take to be an effective operator of the business, talk about the skills and the experience that are transferable, that are relevant, right? If you come from a background of sales, like, there's still a lot of transferable skills there. So talk about those things. But then you need to make sure you supplement, yourself with partners, key, team members, managers, other people that do know what they're doing. So in an acquisition, right, there's probably an established team, so that's good. So if you bring some important experience and it's going to be just you, then you need to talk about, okay, well, the business already has a general manager or a supervisor or whatever, and we have already, talked with them and we ensure this is how we're going to keep them happy and keep them present. And these are the responsibilities they're going to have. So just make sure you really go into detail, one, what your relevant experience and skill set is that you're bringing to the table, and then who else around you is going to make sure that this goes seamless. So make sure that you really demonstrate that. And you can also include, if you have any advisors, mentors that are going to be helping you in some capacity, you can list them as well. But I would say prioritize owners, bid managers, and then key staff members when it comes to that. So as I pointed out, key point number 3 is kind of before and after key point number 4. So key point number 4 is kind of a spot right in the middle, right? Talk about the relevant experience, whoever brings that to the table. But then we're kind of going back to key point number 3, right? So how are we going to grow things without screwing it up? And so we're going to talk about managing the facility, how we're going to upgrade the facility, inventory, supplier management, technology, and then on to the sales and marketing strategy. So this is going to be a continuation of key point number 3. So, this is where we're going to talk about, we're not going to change the branding, right? Because it's been established for a long time. What promotions are we going to do? How are we going to grow we talk about growing the website. So that's a really good way of maintaining what exists, but then growing it, right? If it's a retail shop that's been successful and they just haven't taken full advantage of e-commerce, that's a really natural way to expand the business without screwing up what already exists. So, nothing novel here, just kind of a fictional example, but you can see, we're really late into the business plan, and now we're starting to talk about like, well, how are we gonna grow this thing, from here? And if I was reading this to you word for word, you would see things like actually right here. We will build on the store's strong foundation, emphasizing quality craftsmanship, personalized shopping experience, right? So you can see there's these little nods to, we're going to build on what it's already doing instead of changing everything from the ground up. So those nice little reminders there of that you are still making sure that you're not getting ahead of yourself. Okay, so that brings us all the way up to our last key point. This is kind of the big one, and that is, you obviously know you're going to have financial projections. You might have even already made financial projections, but we're going to talk about this financial projection section. This is what Projection Hub specializes in. We help people write business plans. We help people do quality of earnings reports. We help people, even write business plans, which you can reach out to us if you're interested in that. We write custom business plans. But our main sweet spot that we've done for a long time is create financial projections and help people create financial projections for purposes like this. And so the key point is going to be, your financial projections need to be realistic and kind of within industry norms, right? And probable growth assumptions. You can't say like, we're going to triple revenue in the next year. I mean, maybe you can if there's a good proof for that, a good roadmap for that. But we're going to kind of just go through what this section looks like, and I'll show you some projection. So we've got the current financial overview, right? So this is going to be like the current year. You can see some historical numbers here. You're probably going to, if you have access to them, include historical financial statements like attached to your business plan and appendices. If they'd like to see full, financial statements for that, you probably have access to those. But then you're going to create your own projections. So you can kind of see we've got a nice little fun. Let me zoom in here in case you can see that. So we've got a little 5-year introduction to the projections here, like 5-little summary. We've got some key line items here. We've got some key ratios for the projections of the 5 years, our planned growth and revenue and profitability. We have a break-even analysis in here. I don't mean the formal definition, where I think formal definition of the break-even analysis is when your cumulative income surpasses your cumulative costs and expenses. When I was an SBA lender, we cared a little bit more about like, when did the business on a month-to-month basis break through what was actually bringing in more than that was going out the door, and then that was maintaining, versus like that cumulative total. And so you can see here, we expect to remain profitable. This has been a profitable business. And so by our projections, we want to maintain that and then grow later on. We don't want to dip from that. So that's what we're getting at with break-even analysis. You can just see in this 1-year P&L, we're not really breaking that profitability streak. Then we can, we talk about cash flow management and any money we plan to spend upon that transition. So a little bit of marketing, inventory, some small, website enhancements, a few small interior renovations. So relatively small amount of changes, which is good. That's what we talked about. You can see a breakdown of what the operating expenses, at least categorically, have been for the last 4 or 5 years, and then what we predict them to be. Our funding plans, we've already talked about those and the terms for those. And then you can see our kind of annual summary or summarized projected income statement, cash flow statement, and projected balance sheets. So, as I mentioned, full disclosure, all of those projections were created using this template. So this is linked down in the description below. We have, over 100 different financial projection templates for various industries, but this one is one of our most popular and our most powerful. So it's a universal acquisition projection template. And so it can work for any industry. And what's really great about this is, so just to show you how this works, we're only inputting things on these blue tabs, right? And we're only editing things in the blue boxes. So it's very simple to use. We can set when we want the projection year, or projections to start, when we think the acquisition will happen, some balance sheet data there, loans prior to acquisition, any loans planned for after, for or after the acquisition, equity investments, what fixed assets are already going to be acquired in the sale of the business, and any future projected purchase of assets that we plan to have. And then we've got a little goodwill calculation down here. And then the input revenue. So this is what we're going to base the projections off of. How this works is you can see right here, and you can add as many rows as you'd like to. You can see the different categories of revenue and what they actually were for those years. So that's a monthly number, or sorry, that's the annual number. And then you can even do, if you have any available months of data for the current year, like a partial year. And then we can decide how we want that number to be projected. Do we want it to be an average? Do we want to annualize the current year? Like, how do we want that revenue line? So you might just do one straight line of revenue across, right? Just total revenue. You could do that if you don't want to have it split between, different things. Like the projections I just showed you in the business plan had been filled out specifically for that fictitious example. This template I have open right now isn't filled out for that example. That's why you see things like food and beverage and that kind of stuff. But then it's going to forecast out our 2026, 2027, 28, 2029. You can set, what percentage of growth you want. Hopefully I'm not overcomplicating this for you. It's really quite simple to do. There's an entire video walkthrough on how to fill this out. Adam, the founder and owner, he walks through how to fill out the entire set of projections for an acquisition. And then the expenses side looks very similar, right? We put in what the actual expenses had been, and then how we want those to grow or decrease or change. And then it will project those out. And then it's going to produce some of these charts and graphs you saw in our business plan, including annual summaries of all three key financial statements: income statement, cash flow summary, and balance sheet, as well as a monthly breakdown of each of those. So your lender will probably want both of those. These go out for 5 years. And then the last thing is you can calculate some distribution stuff here, right? So if you're planning to resell the business, you could put a sale assumption of, if you plan to sell it in year 5, what do you want your earnings multiple to be? What do you want the IRR to be for different investors? If that's part of your roadmap, you can. If you plan to just hold the business and operate it for the foreseeable future, then you probably don't need to do this section. But that template is linked down in the description below. If you stick with me to the end of the video, I will give you a discount code on that as well. But yeah, so that's how these projections were created. So key point number 5 isn't to make financial projections. You have to have financial projections. Key point number 5 is making sure that they're realistic, within range for the industry. The best way to do that on your own, if you are interested in doing that, I would highly recommend doing this, is to use a tool like this to create your projections. So you've got it all filled out to your information, and then we've got our outputs. So I like using it for this. But these are all, key, let's call them KPIs. So key performance indicators, key financial data points. You can go out and just look what are industry norms, right? And this might be a good practice if you're considering acquiring a business. They give you financials, go out and benchmark it to see, like, is there anything concerning here? Is it underperforming? Is it overperforming? Take any one of these key numbers and just go Google it. Just go search it. Or if you're comfortable with using a tool like ChatGPT, you can ask for a nice summary. So like I look for benchmarks for established gifts, home decor, artisan goods, retail store. And it gives me things like typical gross profit for a retail business, net profit, and then just start comparing those to your projections to start to dial them in, right? So you really want to make sure, especially if you're giving a lender your projections, that they make a good first impression, that they're realistic, don't have any red flags, because it's really hard to go back. It's really hard to take back your projections and then bring a totally different set to them. That's going to leave your lender with some concerns. And so I would encourage you to take extra time creating your projections to avoid doing that. And then lastly, at the end of the business plan, we've got, what are the risks and how are we mitigating those, right? So those are going to be specific to your situation, but just be honest. What are the risks that you can kind of predict what concerns might a lender have, and then try to come up with a good mitigation for that. And you can talk about that in here. And then appendices where you can attach leases and contracts and all that kind of stuff that would be relevant. So there you have it. That is the full free acquisition business plan template. You can grab a copy of your own down in the description below. As promised, if you are interested in getting that projection template, you can use PH20BP, I believe it is, to get a 20% discount. We've got a link down in the description below too that you can claim a promo code down there. I think that's 15 or 20% off. And lastly, I'll mention, if you're interested in having Projection Hub just do your projections for you, feel free to reach out, go explore on the website. We have a service to do that. We can complete your projections for you, as well as a business plan. You can work with me and my team, and we could write a version like this, but for your business. And we've got a service to do that as well. So we've got a lot of good things on the website that we can help you with. But if you have any questions at all, reach out to us at support@projectionhub.com, or leave a comment down in the description below. We can answer you there too. If you just have questions about your business plan, your acquisition, if you need some help with quality of earnings analysis, or if you just have questions about the SBA process, we're happy to answer any question we can and help you along your way. So with that, I wish you good luck on your acquisition business plan, and we'll see you in the next video.